I never thought I'd be sharing this with strangers on the internet, but here we are. Maybe if I lay it all out, someone will understand that relationships, they're never as simple as they look from the outside. Marcus and I, we met during those chaotic years when you're just trying to figure out who you are. Both of us were grinding away at retail jobs that barely paid rent. I was scraping together every dollar I could for graduate school, while Marcus was pouring his entire soul into launching his startup. Those first couple years, actually pretty decent. We had dreams, big ones, and we supported each other. Well, mostly I supported him. I'd sit there for hours, listening to pitch after pitch, helping him workshop marketing ideas, proofreading business proposals when I should have been buried in my textbooks. But that's love, right? You make sacrifices. We were together for nearly 5 years before he finally put a ring on it. 5 years. 5 years of me essentially hitting pause on my own life while he kept saying he wasn't ready for marriage because the business needed his undivided focus. How convenient. I'd bring up our future sometimes, drop hints about where this was all going, and he always had some excuse lined up. Timing wasn't right. Financial security wasn't there yet. Meanwhile, I'm pushing through grad school, handling all the household stuff, basically being the textbook definition of the perfect girlfriend while he gets to play Silicon Valley wannabe. When I finally walked across that stage with my master's degree, I put my foot down. 5 years invested in this relationship, and I deserved some actual commitment. I wasn't getting any younger, and I'd already given up my entire early 20s for his entrepreneurial fantasies. Marcus finally came around and proposed, probably because he realized what a sweet deal he had. I mean, seriously, how many women would wait around for 5 years while their boyfriend finds himself? Those first few years after the wedding were challenging. That's probably the diplomatic way to put it. I decided to go for my PhD, something I'd been dreaming about forever but kept delaying because Marcus needed so much handholding with his business ventures. He was still completely consumed by work, pulling 12, sometimes 14-hour days at the office, stumbling home like a zombie. I ended up managing pretty much everything at home while juggling my doctoral program, but I kept telling myself it was temporary. Once his company stabilized and I wrapped up my dissertation, we'd finally have that equal partnership I'd been promised. Marcus had this irritating Sunday ritual where he'd spend half the day doing maintenance around the house. Oh, he'd act like he was doing me this massive favor by cleaning gutters and fiddling with the sprinkler system, but honestly, it felt more like he was finding excuses to avoid actual quality time together. Sure, he'd schedule these monthly date nights and quarterly getaways, but they always felt so transactional, like items on a spreadsheet rather than genuine romantic gestures. I finished my PhD after 3 years of absolutely brutal work. I was proud of myself. Not many people have the discipline to complete a doctoral program while essentially running an entire household solo. But instead of immediately diving into some high-pressure career, I decided to take a breath and explore my options. I did volunteer research work, which was fulfilling and gave me the flexibility I desperately needed. Marcus seemed to assume I was building towards something bigger. But honestly, after years of nonstop studying and managing everything at home, I deserved a break. Don't you think? Around our 4th year of marriage, we started trying for a baby. I was getting older, biological clock ticking louder every month, and we both knew if we wanted kids, the window was closing. But month after month, nothing. The fertility struggles were absolutely devastating. Here I was, having done everything by the book, got my education, married a stable man, waited until we were financially secure, and my body just wasn't cooperating. We went to therapy to deal with the stress of trying to conceive. The counselor suggested maybe I should consider focusing on my career while we worked through the fertility issues. Made sense, right? I needed something fulfilling in my life besides the endless cycle of hope and crushing disappointment. Marcus was actually supportive of this idea and helped me land a position at a research firm. I was grateful for his help, even though part of me resented that his connections were necessary for me to even get in the door. Starting work again after so many years away was intimidating as hell, but I found my groove pretty quickly. My colleagues were genuinely impressed with my research background, and I felt intellectually alive in a way I hadn't experienced in years. One colleague in particular, Damien, seemed to really value my expertise. He was about 10 years younger than me, brilliant, and actually listened when I talked about my work. It was refreshing to have conversations that didn't revolve around Marcus's business problems or whose turn it was to pick up groceries. Damien and I started grabbing coffee after work sometimes, discussing research methodologies, industry trends, that kind of thing. It was completely professional at first, but I found myself looking forward to these conversations more than I probably should have. When I'd try to have similar discussions with Marcus, he'd nod politely, but I could tell his mind was elsewhere, probably calculating profit margins or planning his next investor pitch. Over time, I started to realize how much I'd been missing in my marriage. Marcus and I had fallen into this routine where we functioned more like roommates with shared expenses than actual partners. He'd come home from work, we'd eat dinner while discussing practical matters, maybe watch some Netflix, then go to bed. The spark that had once existed between us seemed to have evaporated somewhere between his business obsession and my academic pursuits. My friendship with Damien started filling that emotional void I didn't even realize I had. He'd text me funny observations about our workplace, remember tiny details about conversations we'd had weeks earlier, and genuinely seemed interested in my thoughts and feelings. When I mentioned how isolated I sometimes felt, he understood in a way Marcus never seemed to. Damien had been through a brutal breakup recently and knew what it was like to feel disconnected from someone you'd once been close to. I started spending more time on my phone, texting with Damien and other colleagues. It felt incredible to have a social circle outside of Marcus's business associates and our couple friends. For the first time in years, I felt like I had my own identity, separate from being Marcus's wife. But instead of being happy about my newfound confidence, Marcus became suspicious and controlling. He started interrogating me about who I was texting, why I was always on my phone, whether I was making new friends at work. The questioning was insulting and frankly hypocritical, coming from someone who'd spent years prioritizing his business relationships over our marriage. When I tried to explain that I was just enjoying having colleagues and professional connections, he'd get this wounded puppy look, like I was somehow betraying him. "Sarah, why are you always on your phone now? You never used to be like this." He'd stand there with his arms crossed, like I was my father instead of my husband. I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. This is exactly how you've been for the last 8 years, Marcus. Maybe you're just finally noticing because you're not buried in spreadsheets for once. The truth was, I was tired. So tired of having to justify my friendships and social life to someone who'd never shown the same consideration for my feelings. All those years of him working late, missing dinners, canceling plans because of business emergencies. But now suddenly he was concerned about my availability and attention. My relationship with Damien gradually evolved beyond professional discussions. We'd talk about our personal lives, our disappointments, our dreams for the future. He confided in me about his struggles with his ex, how she'd never really supported his career ambitions. I shared some of my frustrations about feeling unappreciated in my marriage, how Marcus seemed to take everything I did for granted. Damien made me feel alive in a way I hadn't experienced in years. When we talked, I felt like the interesting, intelligent woman I used to be before I got lost in the role of supportive wife. He'd compliment my insights, actively seek out my opinions, and actually remember things I told him weeks earlier. It was intoxicating to feel that valued and seen. I knew our friendship was becoming something more, but I justified it by telling myself I deserved to feel appreciated. After 8 years of putting Marcus's needs first, sacrificing my career timeline for his business goals, managing our household while he pursued his ambitions, wasn't I entitled to some happiness? Damien wasn't just some random guy. He was intelligent, accomplished, and genuinely cared about me as a person, not just as a support system. When Damien and I finally kissed after a particularly emotional conversation about our respective relationships, it felt like waking up from a long sleep. The passion and connection I'd been missing for years suddenly came flooding back. This wasn't just physical attraction, it was emotional intimacy with someone who truly understood and valued me. I started planning how to transition out of my marriage. Marcus and I had grown so far apart that I honestly believed he'd be relieved to end things. We barely communicated beyond logistics, rarely showed physical affection anymore, and seemed to be going through the motions of married life without any real connection. I thought I was doing both of us a favor by ending a relationship that had clearly run its course. My plan was to surprise Marcus with divorce papers on our anniversary. It seemed poetic somehow, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. On the same date, we'd promised to love each other forever. I consulted with a lawyer about asset division and was confident I'd receive a fair settlement given my contributions to our household and with sacrifices I'd made for Marcus's career success. But Marcus started becoming increasingly suspicious and confrontational about my behavior. He'd make passive-aggressive comments about my phone usage, question my work schedule, and generally create this atmosphere of tension and mistrust in our house. Instead of having an honest conversation about the obvious problems in our marriage, he chose to become controlling and paranoid. "Not so easily, honey," I'd tell him when he'd demand to see my phone or interrogate me about my whereabouts. His jealousy and possessiveness were exactly the kind of behavior that had driven me away in the first place. If he'd spent half as much energy on our relationship over the years as he was spending on monitoring my activities, maybe we wouldn't have ended up in this situation. The more pressure Marcus applied, the more I pulled away. When Damien and I finally kissed after a particularly emotional conversation about our respective relationships, it felt like waking up from a long sleep. The passion and connection I'd been missing for years suddenly came flooding back. This wasn't just physical attraction, it was emotional intimacy with someone who truly understood and valued me. I started planning how to transition out of my marriage. Marcus and I had grown so far apart that I honestly believed he'd be relieved to end things. We barely communicated beyond logistics, rarely showed physical affection anymore, and seemed to be going through the motions of married life without any real connection. I thought I was doing both of us a favor by ending a relationship that had clearly run its course. My plan was to surprise Marcus with divorce papers on our anniversary. It seemed poetic somehow, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. On the same date, we'd promised to love each other forever. I consulted with a lawyer about asset division and was confident I'd receive a fair settlement given my contributions to our household and the sacrifices I'd made for Marcus's career success. But Marcus started becoming increasingly suspicious and confrontational about my behavior. He'd make passive-aggressive comments about my phone usage, question my work schedule, and generally create this atmosphere of tension and mistrust in our house. Instead of having an honest conversation about the obvious problems in our marriage, he chose to become controlling and paranoid. "Not so easily, honey," I'd tell him when he'd demand to see my phone or interrogate me about my whereabouts. His jealousy and possessiveness were exactly the kind of behavior that had driven me away in the first place. If he'd spent half as much energy on our relationship over the years as he was spending on monitoring my activities, maybe we wouldn't have ended up in this situation. The more pressure Marcus applied, the more I pulled away. I'd give him just enough attention to keep him from completely losing it, but my heart wasn't in our marriage anymore. How could it be when I'd found someone who actually appreciated me and made me feel like the woman I was meant to be? Damien and I talked about our future together. He was ready to leave his current position and start fresh somewhere new. We fantasized about moving to a different city where we could both pursue better career opportunities without the complications of our current situations. He made me feel young and hopeful in a way I'd forgotten was possible. Looking back, Maybe I should have been more direct with Marcus about wanting a divorce instead of planning the anniversary surprise. But honestly, given his controlling behavior and tendency to make everything about his business concerns, I didn't think he'd handle the conversation maturely. I thought a clean break would be better for both of us. What I didn't expect was for Marcus to completely lose his mind and turn vindictive. Apparently, he'd hired some private investigator to spy on me, like I was a criminal instead of his wife who was unhappy in their marriage. The violation of privacy was stunning, but typical of his controlling personality. The night of my company's quarterly party, I was looking forward to celebrating some recent project successes with my colleagues. Marcus rarely attended these work functions, so I was surprised when he showed up. But instead of supporting me professionally, he decided to humiliate me in front of everyone I worked with. "Happy anniversary, baby," he announced loudly enough for the entire room to hear. "You were planning a surprise for me on our anniversary. Well, I've got one for you first." Then he handed me divorce papers. In front of my boss, my colleagues, Damien, everyone. The mortification was complete. He even had the audacity to raise a toast to the new couple in town and called Damien a worthless son of a bitch, like some kind of deranged person. The whole scene was psychotic and abusive. You don't ambush someone at their workplace, destroy their professional reputation, and humiliate them publicly because you're upset about marital problems. But that's exactly what Marcus did. And somehow, I became the villain in the story? The aftermath was swift and devastating. My company suspended both Damien and me, pending an investigation into our relationship, despite the fact that we'd never done anything inappropriate at work and had maintained complete professionalism in the office. The public scene Marcus created made it impossible for either of us to continue in our positions. Within a week, both Damien and I were terminated. 8 years of marriage, and Marcus destroyed my career and reputation because he couldn't handle the fact that I'd found happiness with someone else. The man I'd supported through his business struggles, whose household I'd managed while pursuing my own education, whose dreams I'd prioritized over my own for nearly a decade. This was how he chose to repay my loyalty and sacrifice. During the divorce proceedings, Marcus's vindictive nature became even more apparent. Despite my significant contributions to our household and the career sacrifices I'd made to support his business success, he fought me on every single aspect of the settlement. His lawyer painted me as some kind of gold digger, completely ignoring the years I'd spent managing our home while he built his company. The most humiliating part was when Marcus showed up at Damien's apartment with audio recordings of private conversations between us. Apparently, his private investigator had been recording us without our knowledge, which seems illegal, but somehow was allowed in court. Marcus played recordings where Damien and I discussed our relationship, including private, intimate details that should never have been shared with anyone else. Damien was devastated by the invasion of privacy and the destruction of his career. The stress of the situation, combined with the financial uncertainty of both of us being unemployed, put enormous strain on our relationship. What had been a beautiful connection based on mutual respect and understanding became complicated by practical concerns about survival and rebuilding our professional lives. The final divorce settlement was nothing like what I'd expected. Despite my lawyer's arguments about my contributions to the marriage and the sacrifices I'd made to support his business success, he fought me on every single aspect of the settlement. His lawyer painted me as some kind of gold digger, completely ignoring the years I'd spent managing our home while he built his company. The most humiliating part was when Marcus showed up at Damien's apartment with audio recordings of private conversations between us. Apparently, his private investigator had been recording us without our knowledge, which seems illegal, but somehow was allowed in court. Marcus played recordings where Damien and I discussed our relationship, including private, intimate details that should never have been shared with anyone else. Damien was devastated by the invasion of privacy and the destruction of his career. The stress of the situation, combined with the financial uncertainty of both of us being unemployed, put enormous strain on our relationship. What had been a beautiful connection based on mutual respect and understanding became complicated by practical concerns about survival and rebuilding our professional lives. The final divorce settlement was nothing like what I'd expected. Despite my lawyer's arguments about my contributions to the marriage and the sacrifices I'd made to support his business success, he fought me on every single aspect of the settlement. His lawyer painted me as some kind of gold digger, completely ignoring the years I'd spent managing our home while he built his company. So here I am, a year and a half later, trying to rebuild my entire life from scratch. I'm working again, but in a position far below my qualifications because my professional reputation was destroyed by Marcus's public humiliation campaign. I'm living in a small apartment instead of the home I helped create and maintain for 8 years. And I'm alone, having lost both my marriage and the relationship I'd hoped would replace it. People who hear this story often act like I'm some kind of villain, but they don't understand the full context. They don't know about the years of emotional neglect, the way Marcus prioritized his business over our relationship, or how isolated and unappreciated I felt in our marriage. They just see the affair and assume I'm a terrible person who destroyed a good marriage for selfish reasons. The truth is much more complicated. I was a woman who'd given the best years of her life to a man who took her for granted, who'd sacrificed her own career timeline and personal goals to support his dreams, and who had finally found someone who made her feel valued and alive again. Yes, I handled the situation imperfectly, but I was trying to find happiness after years of feeling invisible in my own marriage. Marcus's reaction was completely disproportionate and vindictive. Instead of recognizing his role in our marital problems or trying to understand why I'd become so unhappy, he chose to destroy my life as thoroughly as possible. The private investigator, the public humiliation, the legal warfare, all of it was designed to punish me for daring to want something better than the emotionally barren marriage we'd settled into. I understand that infidelity hurts, but Marcus's response revealed a cruel and controlling side of his personality that I'd never fully recognized during our marriage. The man who'd seemed merely neglectful and work-obsessed turned out to be capable of calculated cruelty when his ego was threatened. Damien's abandonment was equally devastating, but perhaps more predictable. Men often lose interest when women become inconvenient or complicated, and my situation certainly became both of those things quickly. What I'd thought was genuine love and connection turned out to be largely based on circumstances that disappeared when Marcus's revenge campaign succeeded. Now I'm trying to rebuild not just my career and financial stability, but my faith in relationships and my ability to trust my own judgment. The whole experience has taught me that people aren't always who they seem to be, and that even long-term relationships can dissolve into bitter warfare when egos and money are involved. I've learned to be more self-reliant and less willing to sacrifice my own goals for someone else's dreams. If I ever get involved in a serious relationship again, it will be as an equal partner, not as a supportive background character in someone else's success story. The hardest part is knowing that Marcus is apparently happier than ever. According to mutual friends, while I'm still struggling to get back on my feet, his business continues to thrive. He kept our beautiful house, and he's probably telling everyone who will listen about how he escaped from his terrible, cheating wife. Meanwhile, I'm working to rebuild everything I lost when I tried to find happiness outside of our failing marriage. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd handled things differently. if I had demanded counseling, insisted on honest conversations about our problems, or simply filed for divorce before getting involved with Damien. But I can't change the past, and I refuse to spend the rest of my life apologizing for wanting to feel loved and appreciated. What happened between Marcus and me was the result of years of growing apart, poor communication, and incompatible priorities. The affair was a symptom of deeper problems, not the cause of our marriage's failure. His vindictive response revealed who he really was underneath the facade of the successful, stable husband. The May Lifestyle podcast has helped so many people recover from such extreme situations in just a couple of months. I mean, I'm focused now on my own healing and growth, on rebuilding my career and financial independence, and on learning to trust my instincts about people and relationships. The experience was brutal, but it's taught me valuable lessons about resilience, self-advocacy, and the importance of maintaining my own identity within a partnership. Someday, I hope to find someone who appreciates me for who I am, who values partnership over control, and who understands that love requires ongoing effort and attention from both people. Until then, I'm learning to be content with my own company and proud of how far I've come despite everything that was taken from me.